Hi everyone, it's Sandy, and in today's video I will be talking about my most disappointing reads of 2018. I do want to mention that most of these books I rated like a 3 stars, some are like a 2 or a 2.5. I don't think I gave a book a 1-star rating this year, but most of these books are disappointing because I had higher expectations going into it and I expected more from the story, and unfortunately they didn't live up to my expectations. The first book that I wanted to talk about is Unearthed by Amie Kaufman and Meagan. This book is described as being Indiana Jones but in space, and it follows two main characters, Amelia and Julian. They have very different goals that I'm not going to get into, but then they must end up working together in order to survive. This is one of the first books that I read in the beginning of 2018, so I really don't remember much of it, but I just expected a lot more from this book, and this book just didn't live up to what I was expecting. I did pick this book up as an audiobook and I just really couldn't get into it. This was just a book that I struggled to get through in understanding the world, and because of that, unfortunately, I didn't enjoy this book as much as I wanted to. My next disappointing read is People Like Us by Dana Mele. This book follows the main character, Kay Donovan, who goes to this private school. She's a star soccer player and she also has a group of pretty popular friends. One day, Kay and her group of friends find a dead body in a lake, and then soon afterwards, Kay is left with a computer-coded scavenger hunt that is left by the girl that died. I thought that all of these side characters in this book were pretty underdeveloped. I kept confusing Kay's friends with one another, and it was just really hard to follow who was who. The premise of the story was definitely very interesting, but overall the plot was boring and the execution fell flat. There was a lot of high school drama in this book and a lot of toxic relationships, and I didn't like where the story went. I thought the ending was just very weak and underwhelming. The next disappointing read is Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas. This book focuses on Cale's character and his storyline. I wasn't too keen on having to read a whole separate book about Cale's character, but I heard a lot of amazing things prior to going into it, so I was kind of excited to go into it, but then I read it and I was just bored. Sarah J. Maas just has a thing for writing really long books, and this was just so long. This book is almost 650 pages. There are definitely aspects of the story that are important for the final book, but overall, was a 650-page book necessary? Not really. Didn't really enjoy having to read this book. I didn't find the story very engaging. This story was just so slow, and because it felt so slow, I felt bored reading it. The next book is another Sarah J. Maas book, and that is A Court of Frost and Starlight. This is a novella that takes place after A Court of Wings and Ruin, and this is supposed to be a bridge to the spin-off ACOTAR trilogy, and this is just a 200-page novella where nothing happens. While it was nice to be back in the ACOTAR world and to read from all these characters again, this novella was just pointless, and it mostly consists of fluff, and it doesn't really have any connection to the next ACOTAR trilogy until the last 20-ish pages, and unfortunately I ended up rating this book a 2 out of 5 stars. I only gave it that 1 extra star because of the characters. I did still enjoy reading about the characters, but other than that, I really didn't feel the need to have actually read this novella. The next book is Til Death by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is a mystery book following a girl named Sasha who was actually kidnapped when she was like 19 years old. She ends up escaping and surviving, but after being kidnapped, she moves far away from her hometown, and now the story takes place about 10 years later, and she's moving back to her hometown to help her mom out. And of course, as soon as she moves back to town, there are women that have been disappearing and ending up dead. I did kind of like the mystery aspect of the book, but I felt like the two main characters, Sasha and Cole, were very one-dimensional. You know that Cole is a police officer, and you know that Sasha has been kidnapped before, but I felt like their characters were very flat and underdeveloped, and also their dynamic between one another kind of felt forced. I also wasn't a huge fan of Cole and some of his behaviors throughout the book, and unfortunately I did guess the ending, so I wasn't blown away by it. But overall, this was just an okay read. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I wanted to talk about is From Twinkle with Love by Sandhya Menon. I really wanted to like this book, but unfortunately I didn't. In case you don't know what this book is about, it follows an Indian main character named Twinkle, and she is an aspiring filmmaker. She teams up with another character named Sahil to direct a movie for a summer festival. Twinkle actually has a crush on Sahil's twin brother Neil. However, once Twinkle and Sahil begin working together and getting to know one another, Twinkle begins to develop feelings for him. The story is also told through letters to Twinkle's favorite female directors, and I really liked that aspect of the story and how it was formatted. There's also this secret admirer plot in this book that I really did not like. like. It just really made me hate the whole romance situation in this book. I love Twinkle and Sahil together, and having the secret admirer plot added into the story just made me really annoyed and irritated. Additionally, we also have the subplot of Twinkle having a crush on Sahil's twin brother Neil. One of the main reasons that Twinkle wanted to work with Sahil in the first place is that she thinks it will allow her to get closer to Neil, and this whole Neil thing and secret admirer plot just made me really annoyed and frustrated. I thought it was so predictable who her secret admirer was from the very beginning of the book, and I feel like this whole secret admirer plot doesn't add anything to the book other than making Twinkle very indecisive about her feelings for Sahil. So unfortunately, I didn't enjoy this book very much. My next disappointing read is War Storm by Victoria Aveyard. This is the fourth and final book in the Red Queen series. I actually really loved the first book, Red Queen. I know it has a lot of things that are very similar to other YA dystopian books, but I really enjoyed it. I don't know if this is just like a me thing where I took so long to read each of the following book in the series where I just eventually lost complete interest in the whole series, and I felt like I only read the last book just to know how it ended. I pretty much picked up War Storm because it was just the last book and I wanted to be done with it and I wanted to know how it ended, but I didn't necessarily care how it ended or what happened to the characters or anything about the story. One thing that I do remember not liking about the story is that we had a character point of view who I just did not care about and did not want to be in that character's perspective. This character is considered the enemy, and so you kind of see all the things that this character is doing, and so when the other characters find out about it, it's just not surprising. This story didn't keep me on my toes, it didn't keep me at the edge of my seat. Basically, my final thoughts after reading this book is, thank God it's over. My next disappointing read is The Girl at Midnight by Melissa Gray. It follows this character named Echo who is a thief. She's an orphan and is eventually adopted by this character named the Alla, who is part of this ancient race of creatures that have feathers for hair and magic as well. The Avacyn are actually at war with this other group of creatures called the Dracarin, and Echo gets involved in this search for this object called the Firebird, and the Firebird is supposedly able to end the war. I did listen to this book as an audiobook, and I feel like with a lot of like the fantasy audiobooks that I listen to, I have a much harder time getting into it and becoming invested in the story. And unfortunately that happened to me when I read this book. It did take me quite a bit to get through it. While listening to this whole thing, I did find myself at times having to go back and re-listen to certain parts because I was just confused as to what was happening and what the characters were doing. I did like the plot and I liked Echo's character and her friendship with Ivy, and I did like some of the side characters as well. I didn't really like the romance. At the very start of the book, Echo is in a relationship with another character, and all of a sudden when this new character is introduced, and there's definitely tension between this new character and Echo, and soon they begin to have feelings for each other, and this whole time that this is happening, Echo is still in a relationship with another character. This book has been compared to Daughter of Smoke and Bone, and I actually didn't realize that until after reading this book and reading some of the reviews. I can definitely see that, but I wasn't a fan of Daughter and Smoke and Bone, and so unfortunately I also wasn't a fan of this book as well. My next disappointing read is This Is Our Story by Ashley Elston. This book centers around the mystery of 5 boys who went hunting, and only 4 came back alive. It is suspected that this 5th boy was murdered and that one of these 4 boys was the killer. And this whole story follows the main character Kate, who works in the DA's office, and so she's working along with her boss to unravel this whole mystery. I feel like a lot of YA mystery books have been disappointing me lately. While the plot was definitely interesting, the story did drag and the ending was very anticlimactic to me. There was also a romance that developed in the story that I just didn't care for. Most of the story is just build-up, but the build-up just felt really boring. I didn't find the story to be very gripping. I didn't really feel like I got to know the characters, especially the 4 boys who were friends with the victim. Unfortunately, I felt like the ending was just a flop and just felt very anticlimactic. My next disappointing read is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco. This story is inspired by the murders of Jack the Ripper, and it follows the main character Audrey Rose, who wants to practice forensic medicine. Her uncle has a lab where he does autopsies or something related to that. She secretly works in this lab against her father's wishes, and eventually she gets involved into the investigation of a serial killer. I've heard a lot of good things about this story and I was really excited to get into it. Unfortunately, I didn't enjoy the story very much, and I predicted who the killer was from the beginning. The further I got into the story, the less excited I was about the mystery. I did really like Audrey Rose's resistance to gender norms, however the characters did feel dull at times, and I just wish there was more development of the relationship between Audrey Rose and Thomas. The second to last book is Little White Lies by Jennifer Lynn. Lynn Barnes. This story follows Sawyer, who is 18 years old. She's an auto mechanic and she's approached by her estranged grandmother to participate in debutante season. As an incentive to do so, her grandmother offers her a 6-figure contract. The story has to do with scandals and family secrets, and there's also a mystery involved. I was really excited to get into the story because I absolutely love Jennifer Lynn Barnes' other books with the Natural series and the Fixer. But unfortunately, I was just really disappointed with this one. The premise of the story is definitely very different from what I've read before, but the further I got into the story, I just found myself not really caring that much. I feel like the execution of the story is kind of a mess, the way that it was written, the way that it was formatted. It's told in before and after chapters, and the after chapters take place after these girls are arrested and they're locked up in a cell, and you're trying to figure out what led up to that in the before chapters. The before chapters take place within the course of like 8 months, and so leading up to these after chapters, I honestly had no idea where the story was going or what it was working towards. There was just a bunch of different little storylines trying to come to play, and so that kind of caused the story to go in a bunch of different directions. Obviously, the further you get into it, the more things make sense, but it still took quite a while for things to connect. There will be a second book, and I'm not sure how long the series is supposed to be, but I thought that the ending was very abrupt. Since there is a sequel, obviously the story is going to leave you with some questions, but I still wanted a bit more closure to the story. I felt like it just kind of ended in the middle of a scene. Honestly, I probably will pick up the sequel because I do want to know where the story goes. But overall, this just wasn't my favorite of Jennifer Lynn Barnes' books. If you're interested in reading one of her books, I would definitely recommend the Natural series or the Fixer. They're both amazing and a lot better than this one. And the very last disappointing read of 2018 is Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young. This is actually a standalone fantasy book that has to do with Vikings. It follows the main character, Elin, who is 17 years old. She's raised as a warrior. The story definitely had a very strong start. It takes place in the middle of a battlefield. Throughout the fighting, Elin encounters her brother, who she thought had died 5 years ago. Not only is her brother alive, but he's fighting on the enemy's side. Elin is eventually captured by the enemy, and she ends up living in the household that her brother lives in. But while I enjoyed seeing all the different relationships and dynamics between Elin and all the other characters, I thought that nothing really happens in the story. Most of the story is Elin just being mad at her brother and also trying to understand her brother's choices. I definitely understand where Elin is coming from, but I also feel like her relationship with her brother was very underdeveloped. I felt like I didn't really get to know her brother and her relationship with him because the story also focuses on a romantic relationship that Elin has with another character. I didn't care for the romance, and I felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. When the story isn't focused on developing the relationship between Elin and this other character, it's spent in boring conversations and household chores with other characters. The story definitely had a lot of potential, but unfortunately it didn't have a lot of substance. Those are all of the disappointing books that I read in 2018. If you've read any of these books, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I did read quite a handful of books that are part of a series, so let me know if it's worth continuing with some of these series because they get better. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye!